Most performance reviews, if they were films, they'd be under the horror category, I think, with an occasional comedy.
As his preparation for my performance review, and he took his pencil, turned it on its side, shaded in the 3 column. That was clearly about checking a box, building the qualifications to do the reviews, right? We talked a lot about, everything from my boss who turned his pencil sideways to not having the trust to the defensive reaction. If you can't get past that, it's never going to be the experience that I think it should be. And you're not going to get past that without managers really cultivating the right environment and being taught how to do it. How do you execute continuous improvement if you're not reviewing, learning, and adjusting? Change the structure of how they do the review to cover what we just discussed, regardless of whether the HR system wants them to do it that way or not. And then go back and fill in whatever the hell you got to fill in to tick the box. How do I build on what you're good at? How do I get the wind at your back? And less on how do I get you to do the things that you don't like doing or you're not good at. If you haven't set the right tone with the person that you are about to offer the feedback to, think long and hard about how you're going to be able to do it effectively.
Hello, and welcome back once again to the Inquisitor podcast. Today, my guest is Jordan Corn. Jordan and I are going to talk about the annual Festival of Fiction, otherwise known as performance reviews. Without any further ado, would you mind introducing yourself and giving us a minute or two on your history?
Yeah, sure. My name is Jordan Corn. You can probably tell I'm based in the United States. In my main life, I am an IT architect and sometimes a business analyst, sometimes a product owner, which sounds like it should have nothing to do with performance reviews. But over the many years of my career, I've had plenty of people work for me, and I've been the external awareness for people who think everyone else thinks they walk on water.
Well, you think about contexts and moments in which certain things happen, and you ask them to reflect. And so, Jordan, tell me something. When you and Fred were having that conversation on Project X, when this happened, what did you notice?
That he wasn't listening to me.
Understood. Okay, so let's assume you're correct. What did you do in order to help him see your point of view other than tell him?
Well, I tried to repeat it, and I repeated it like 6 different ways.
Okay, and when that didn't work, what did you do?
I decided he was never going to get it.
Okay, and so has that happened in any other circumstances where you've been working on projects and
Well,
other people didn't get it?
yeah, it happens a lot because, so many of the people I have to talk to aren't in IT and they just don't understand.
Okay, so my old father used to tell me that if it happens once, it's a coincidence. If it happens twice, it's a pattern. And if it's three times, it's me. Is there a possibility that the one constant in all of your dissatisfying relationships might be how you show up? And is there anything that you could do in order to modify your behavior so you don't get so frustrated?
Yeah, that's kind of like, well, when the patient goes to the doctor and, touches his shoulder and says it hurts, touches his head and says it hurts, touches his knee and says it hurts. And the doctor eventually says, well, where does it hurt? And he says, my finger. It's like, yeah, maybe you need to stop touching yourself with that finger. No, I get your point. I, I, I don't know how easy it is to get people to see that, especially if they come in with an attitude of arrogance, right? I obviously intentionally picked something that's pretty easy to pick apart, but I've seen people in that pattern, and despite coaching, they can't get out of it. And by the way, to kind of put a bow on that story, I did have an individual like that once, and I gave them a subpar score, not dramatically, on that element of their behavior, because that was, loosely speaking, that was one of the competencies we looked at, and the person had a fit and insisted on talking to HR. So there's something HR helps you with, right? It may not be a lawsuit, but at least they'll take some of the heat. And then HR wanted to talk to me. And when I'd gone through my story with HR, their question was, given everything you just told me, why did you rate this person that highly? And I just started laughing. I was girded for a need to defend, because that's what happens when you get called in. And I didn't approach it defensively, but I was, tensed up and ready. And I went through all of it, and they're like, we think you overrated him. It's like, yeah, imagine if it had been lower, the reaction I would have gotten. So
Well,
I guess you can, but at some point, and maybe that's the point where you say, you know what, we got to either change this person's role, or we got to rethink, are they a fit in the organization?
ta-da! And
Yeah.
this again is where I think we have to look at it holistically and we have to look at it as part of a system. And the question that keeps coming back to my mind is, are we hiring the right people? Are we promoting the right people? Because
Well,
very often, I think what we do is we compromise to put a warm body in a seat. And my pal Jim White, who sadly passed away a couple of years back, said, "Is he better than an empty chair?" And often the answer is no.
I don't know if you watch Slow Horses,
I do.
but that could absolutely be a Jackson Lamb line.
Yeah.
Is he better than an empty chair? I love that. I love that. Uh, and it's an absolutely valid question. And you're right, because, and this ties into the whole problem with the hiring process, where everyone's looking for the purple unicorn. You got to have 500 things that you've done. You have to have done them all for 10 years, 15 years. And by the way, it's an entry level position. Yeah, I'm only exaggerating slightly in the tech world. But there's also the challenge that the bar moves. I had one person who, many years ago, who I talked about their challenges along the way, and at review time did not give them a good review. And they said, well, this is the first time in the many years that I've worked here that anyone's ever said this. And it was devastating. Meanwhile, all I said was stuff that everybody already knew. And I think that also goes to the problem. There's sort of two pieces to that. One, the bar does change. And two, is if there isn't a good process in place, if the review is all performance theater, that's what happens. No one wants to level the critique. And it goes back to, am I doing the review just to check it off? Am I doing the review for it to be useful? Why am I doing it?
This comes back down to the courage of hiring good managers. Um, my pal Ben was talking about it to a community that we're building called Sellers Anonymous, and he cited two or three examples where he took a risk hiring people who came from outside of the industry, who had no experience or were very junior, and promoted them into very senior positions where they were managing massive global accounts, or where took them on and the bosses were saying she'll never work out. And yet, the people that he hired are now among the most successful and most senior people within that business because he was willing to take the risk and he saw something in them that others didn't because they were looking for this cookie cutter template of the purple unicorn. And the reality is, when you look at most job descriptions and then you speak to the people who are hired and say, is this the job that you bought when you took it? Almost no one says yes.
Yeah.
And the job evolves. So I think we've got to look at performance reviews as the stitching. And if we're smart, when we hire people, we hire for the job that they're meant to execute, not to tick a few boxes and meet whatever the terrible job description that was cut and paste from the person you've just fired. Um, and then you wonder why you get a revolving door of people leaving your org.
Yeah, that is absolutely, absolutely a problem. I had the fortune of being hired by someone exactly in the fashion you described. They saw something in me that no one else did, and they ended up actually creating the job I took. And I remained in that organization for a long time and did quite well there. And in that case, it was really more about fit than checking all the boxes in what would have been the job description had they written it. I I, I don't know how you change that. If you look at anything about hiring now, what you're describing is a huge struggle across all professions. And some of it has to do with the flattening of the whole hiring process. Any job that's posted on LinkedIn, and that is the place to post, within 24 hours has hundreds of applicants. So what happens? Well, now you say, well, I got to tighten the requirements so that I can cull through them faster. You have your applicant tracking system spit out 99% of the resumes. You're not going to find the right
One of
person
the
most of the
clients
time.
I worked with took my advice and he created a hiring process and he took it a bit further. So the credit goes to him. And when he's advertising for a role, he says, I'm looking to hire an account executive. And then he writes, these are all the people in my team. These are my previous bosses. These are the people in my former teams. Contact any of them and then cold call me. Now, generally what happens is he gets one or two calls, and when he does make a hire, they've worked out brilliantly, and within 18 months to 2 years, they've got promoted, they've knocked the ball out of the park. Um, and the difference there is that he's focusing on the job that they're going to have to do. So from the very first touch, he's being totally transparent. He's creating the conditions where, off their own bat, they have to take the initiative and do the thing that most people hate to do, which is pick up the phone. And then in that first few seconds, he can make a very quick assessment as to how it's going to feel to be on the receiving end of one of their calls. And he bypasses all of that HR clutter and all of that noise because the advertised market is just a blood red sea. So
That is a phenomenal technique. I love it. I love it.
it works an absolute storm if you're willing to be courageous enough to do it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You don't need any of that, and you don't need the purple unicorn job description and the 1,000 applicants. And the ATS that ditches 99.9% of them, and then the one who's left still doesn't have the qualifications you want or isn't a
Yeah.
fit. Brilliant.
So
Brilliant.
if
How
we
do we
look
do
at,
that for performance management?
well, he does that as well because he coaches on a daily basis. Every day there's a little bit of coaching. Every week there's a sit down with his people, and with a team of two on his team, so him plus two, he's outperforming every other team in the business that has 11.
Mm,
Why? Because they're focused on the right end of the problem and they're doing the job
yeah.
intended. They're not going through the performance theater.
Well, they're not waiting a year to hear
Yeah,
either,
exactly.
right?
And because again, it's the old story of a plane is off course 99% of the journey. And you've got
Right.
to make those
Right.
little adjustments. And this is where compound interest comes in. If you improve 0.1% per day of a working year, you will improve 34%.
Yep. The most powerful force in the universe.
Yeah. So why
Yeah.
are we not taking this approach to performance management?
All right. So let me ask you a question. For those of us who might not be diligent enough to do daily or weekly reviews, is annual better than not at all? Yeah. Good reaction.
In all honesty, I think it's just putting lipstick on a pig.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know that I agree with that. And here's why. Imagine that your airplane is off course 99% of your 100-minute flight. At the 99th minute, granted, they're going to come in late, but wouldn't you rather they correct than that they just keep going?
Yeah, but people don't because the annual performance review is where we say we must do better and nothing changes.
It depends on how you conduct it, right? If you go back to what I said and actually go through the assessment, create vulnerability, you know, spend as much time, if not more, talking about what the person did well. Why can't that work? And I'm not going to pretend it's ideal, but why is that not better than the empty chair and doing nothing?
Well, I think the pros are it'll give one moment of reflection and it provides documentation to cover your ass with a paper trail for
Yeah,
pseudo,
check the box. I know,
yeah,
tick the box.
for
Yeah.
pseudo fairness and pay decisions and compliance.
Oh, that's
Um,
another problem. We
and
talk about that too.
it's a symbolic sign of care. And it gives a brief blink of a moment of structured accountability. But that's like going to take your car in to make sure it's still roadworthy. In the UK, we have the MOT, and a car over 3 years has to pass the MOT. So
Yep.
yeah, there is some value in that, but generally, too little, too late. Theatre replaces truth. It creates massive anxiety, not any growth. It distorts motivation, and it punishes honesty. So, on balance, no.
Again, I think it's a function of how you do it. I would rather do it annually than not at all. And again, I'm not going to say that that's the best way, but I'm still thinking about that airplane, and I'd rather at least take the shot at trying to correct it at the 99th minute
Well,
and then
what
let it
about
go.
peer accountability then?
What do
Because
you mean
I
by
think
that?
one of the things that I like to do with my clients is create a buddy system. So if you're going to put something into forecast, you and another salesperson have to sign off on it. So you create a mutual accountability pairing, and they spend the time once a week having these calls.
I love that, and I have often done paired assignments. The downside is if you think back to the group projects you did in high school,
Mhm.
there's always somebody who didn't pull their weight, and and maybe that's the stereotype, but it's also true a lot of the time. And the rest of the team just kind of swarms around and fixes it. I think the perception is that that's the risk that the stronger player will cover for the one who's not as strong, which to me you can get around by watching both players on the team talking to both of them, which I guess is going to put me in the regular coaching camp, right? To say to person A, hey, is person B holding up their end of the deal? And again, I'm going to have some sort of safety created to get an honest answer from person A, right? So I get it, but it does have its challenges.
It does, but again, I reckon a lot of this is down to systemic dysfunction and lack of planning. If we one of the things I like to do is we operate in trimesters rather than quarters.
Okay.
And you have a 120-day sprint. That 120-day sprint is broken down into monthly milestones. Those monthly milestones are broken down into weekly experiments, and those are broken down into daily activities and behaviors.
Are you
And
sure you're not in IT? Because that sounds a lot like what everybody calls agile development.
well, I've stolen from the lean model,
Yeah, okay,
because yeah,
okay.
for
Yep,
the simple reason that it bloody works. If you have a logistics business and you're moving cardboard boxes, teaching your team how to sharpen their blade um, will save each person about 10 minutes a day. When you have 20 of them, that's 200 man minutes, which is 1,000 man minutes a week, which is 52,000 or
yeah,
50,000 over the course of a year. Well,
yep.
that's a shitload of time that you can recover on something quite
That's
so simple.
that's
Now,
more than 25 people.
right. Well, and this is just mind blowing, the incremental gain of making small improvements consistently. So, one of the things that I always teach is the 0.5% rule. Anybody can improve 0.5% a day. Anybody. Doesn't matter how inept they are, they can all improve by 0.5%. If everybody is improving by 0.5%, you get a well over 300% uplift over the course of a year. And it's very difficult for someone to turn up 2 or 3 days in a row saying, I haven't done what I said I was going to do.
Yeah, yeah,
And so that's where those huddles come in. And
yep.
this is why I think the performance review, it has its place. That if it's done well, but if we're just treating it like the performance theatre and a check in the box to comply to say that we're investors in people and we've got an audit trail so that we can fire people at will later, that doesn't serve anybody. And I think it's just
Yeah,
inhumane.
yeah. We're actually pretty close to being in the same place there, with the one exception of his annual better than not at all. So let me ask you about something else, or talk about something else. The whole number scheme, right?
Oh,
Usually, at least I'm not sure how it is there, but in the States, it's almost always 1 to 5, right?
yeah.
And I have vivid recollections early in my career of a manager of mine who, as his preparation for my performance review, and I'm old and gray, so this was back when this was all on paper. He took his pencil, turned it on its side, shaded in the 3 column. That was clearly about checking a box. I mean, I'm amazed he spent the time to think to turn his pencil on its side instead of just drawing a line straight down. And it's like, if you're going to do that, what's the point? And why did he pick 3? Because you don't have to do anything if you say 3. Anything under 3, you've got to explain why the person has to improve. Anything over 4, you have to tell them how great they are. And in fact, I have been in organizations where basically the range ends up being 3 to about 3.75. You can't give anyone a 1 because then they got to leave and they're not that bad. And nobody gets a 5 because that's just the way it is. All right, so now I'm
Well,
down to
five,
2 to
five
4.
is perfect, and it's there to tell you that
Yeah, no, exactly.
that you aren't.
Exactly. Yeah. And 4 is close enough to perfect that you better be ready to defend it. And 2 is pretty bad, and you're going to have to put them on an improvement plan. So for the vast majority of people who are largely doing what they need to do, you're already down to maybe 2.5 to 3.75. So what's the point of having the 5-point scale? And then you come to the question, and I mentioned this earlier, tying it to compensation is just stupid. And also, I think, damages the value of the review, right? And we all pretend, at least in a lot of organizations, they pretend there's no tie between the review and the compensation. But then when you go to the compensation part of the HR system, they tell you, well, for an employee at this rating, this is the band raise they should get.
Hmm.
And everyone knows that's happening. I've already narrowed it down so that they're all within 1 point of each other. That part, I think, is absolutely inane. And it has led me to the question, which is not going to sound like anything I've said to date. At what point do companies just bail on the performance review? I know that was a lot.
Well, I'm going to ask a question back in return,
Sure, go ahead.
which I think is going to build on that. Which is, when was the last time you saw a review that genuinely changed someone's behavior for the better?
Well, considering that for the last 3 years I didn't get one, which was a function of the organization, it's been at least that long. If I go back farther, the individual I talked about who I graded below par, I don't think his behavior changed, but it ended up leading to a job change.
Yeah,
So it
but
accomplished something. I don't know that it accomplished what you said. And that it's a really good question. That goes back to my friend who said he was tired of the 55 minutes on what he didn't do well.
well,
And
all
I,
I'm hearing you tell me is that nothing would really change and nothing would break if we stopped doing them all together. because they're not valuable and they're not valued and they're not insightful. They
I think
they
on the
should be and they could be.
I think on the performance piece, you may be right. That's only a may. That's only a may. On the planning part, I don't agree because, like I said, I can use that to think about because I admit I'm not doing it daily. What would be a good thing for this person to be working on or toward? I have seen them successfully drive training. What?
A career plan.
Yeah, nobody does that anymore. Career
Do
plans are
it.
gone.
Do it. Sit down with your people and say, Jordan, in a year's time, where would you like to be? What would you
Oh, I've
like
done
over there?
that.
Right.
I've done that.
Okay.
That's not a
And then
career
create
plan.
a pathway backwards from the outcome a year from
Yeah,
now or 2 years from now.
and
And
I've done some of that. I also think that a place you can really do well, I don't think you're going to get people to change what we call the negatives, but you can do things to play to people's strengths and lean into the positives,
fair enough. Because
right?
I
Now,
think
how
your
often?
strengths are your development areas, your weaknesses aren't. You can put me in a
Yeah,
room and train me in Excel for 2 weeks. I will still be shit at it.
yeah, right. And you can put me in a room and teach me about cold calling for 6 months, and I'm still going to not enjoy doing it,
Yeah, exactly.
right?
Well, again, I'm with you 100%. I haven't done a cold call since 2004. There's no need.
Yeah,
If you
well,
if you if you
yeah,
work out how to get referred,
yes,
then you only have to make one cold call, and the rest should be referral.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so okay, so if we're thinking about redesigning this performance review process and building a set of best practices so that it actually delivers the job intended, what does that need to look like?
My semi sarcastic answer to that is it needs to start with managers building the qualifications to do the reviews, right? We talked a
Yes,
lot about, everything from my boss who turned his pencil sideways to not having the trust to the defensive reaction. If you can't get past that, it's never going to be the experience that I think it should be. And you're not going to get past that without managers really cultivating the right environment and being taught how to do it, which is probably at the end of the day more valuable than the review process itself, right? So it's got to look like that. I really think it's got to be non-numeric. We didn't talk about that much till the end, but you saw me rant about that. I think it's got to be utterly divorced from the compensation conversation. It's too tied. I think it needs to be designed to lean more, as I just said, into strengths. How do I build on what you're good at? How do I get the wind at your back? And less on how do I get you to do the things that you don't like doing or you're not good at. That would probably be my framework. And I think I would go as far as saying, you know what, if you're not going to do it that way, and to be fair, if you're not going to do it more than annually, throw the whole thing out.
yeah. Well, I think you earn the right to criticize by being caring consistently. And you know that the review's already over if your people flinch when you start a sentence.
Or when they walk in and their shoulders are up and their
Yeah.
forehead is scrunched.
You
Yeah.
know, feedback isn't a meeting, it's a byproduct of ongoing respect. It's
Yeah.
a, the practical questions you've got to ask is, do they believe I want them to succeed? Have I earned the right to tell them the truth? Do I know
Well
what they
said.
care about?
Yeah. And much of the time, the answer is no. Too often, the answer is no.
Yeah. I mean,
And
go on.
what you've just captured there, that's really what I've tried to do with people who work on my team. And I think that's a really good benchmark.
Thank you. I agree. Um, yeah, most performance reviews, if they were films, they'd be under the horror category, I think, with an occasional comedy. And we should rewrite the script on it. The depressing reality is that you've got an opportunity to create some honesty and some bilateral feedback or bidirectional feedback. Um, and it needs to be a conversation, not being talked at, not being talked down to, not being attacked, especially not attacking people at an identity level. You, you are, and so on. And more often than not, I think a really good performance review will result in the manager asking questions like, "So, Jordan, how could I have helped you more?"
Yeah.
What are the areas that you want to grow in that I'm not supporting you?
Yep.
What do I
Yep.
need to do to improve?
The only issue I take with what you just said is that the only movies people go see are horror films, comedies, and superhero movies. So if we do this with our performance reviews, nobody's going to go watch them.
Oh well.
Yeah, so it goes. But maybe, well, as you've said, it's not meant to be theater, so maybe it's okay that nobody's going to go watch them. But yeah, you're right. Asking how you can help, and
I
that's not
think,
just for performance reviews. That's for so many things.
yeah, just be a decent bloody human being instead of thinking that, a manager's job is not to manage. A
Yeah.
manager's job is to empower other people on
Yes.
their team to do their job well. And it's a service function. They don't serve you, you serve them. Outside
Absolutely.
the military academy in Santos, their motto is serve to lead.
Yeah. Servant leadership. Absolutely.
Well,
Absolutely.
management is about servant leadership. It's not about control. You get control by giving up controlling.
Yeah, I can't disagree with you there at all. I love when people are empowered. I love when they succeed. One of the best things that I ever saw in my whole career happened when I left an organization and a person on my team, it wasn't because I left, a person on my team who was staff level replaced me and was named a director.
Lovely.
It made my month.
Yeah. No, nothing is more satisfying than that in my book. Where I live for the moments where my clients come back and tell me about their victories.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the stuff that gets me out of bed in the morning. Because the real job of the performance review, in my mind, isn't evaluation. It's learning, it's alignment, it's trust building and consolidation. And it's the organization's built-in reflection ritual, if you like.
Mhm.
And it allows us to justify pay decisions instead of driving growth. And that's a failure of the system if that's how you're using it, like you said. Um, and I think the review should synchronize reality, not sanitize it. If we're looking at preparation, we should prime, not surprise. So, you send your
Mhm.
intent a week in advance. I
Yep.
want us to talk about what's working, what's hard, what's next. And so it's not an ambush. I think both the manager and employee have to fill in and respond in advance.
Yes.
What are they proud of? What are they struggling with? What have they learned? What do they need from you or the company? And the goal has to be stated up front that we're trying to leave smarter than when we arrived. Not I'm going to beat you for the next hour so you can resent me. And then, we need to look at the frequency. Regular micro check-ins, maybe monthly for 15 to 30 minutes. Regular post-project debriefs, upward feedback moments. Um, Keep a journal and written reflection. Maybe share that journal. An annual review without ongoing feedback is like washing once a year. You're still going to stink pretty soon.
Still better than not.
Yeah.
But no, putting the frequency question aside, and whether we want to correct the play at the 99th minute, I am 100% on board with what you've said. And if you can't do it that way, if your organization isn't going to do it that way, probably not worth doing.
I agree. I think, to take this further in terms of best practices, how to do it well, from what you said, it's got to be bi-directional. So both parties share reflections before the meeting so that neither side is being ambushed. You separate pay from performance conversations. You focus on behavior and impact, not personality.
Yep.
And you build an environment of psychological safety. And you keep the goals agile. So you replace rigid KPIs with learning targets, growth targets, development targets. And what we want to see is progression. It's not the destination that matters, it's the journey that matters. And have a proper debrief process. So how was this review for you? What worked, what didn't, what could be improved for the next time? One of my favorite things when I'm onboarding new salespeople is the last person in is responsible for critiquing the onboarding process and for onboarding the next person in because they're
That's good.
closest to it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we've got to enjoy the wins as well. So celebrate even the little wins along the way. Recognition is so important. And as human beings, we thrive on it. But
Yeah.
again, if you're just going in for a beating, no one wants to go to the woodshed for a flogging.
Oh, there's some masochists who probably do, but
Yeah, well, maybe.
not most of us. Not most of us.
I'd prefer to be the other end of the stick if I'm being honest, but
I prefer not to have anything to do with the stick either
yeah.
way. Yeah. I don't want to get beaten and I don't want to be eaten.
So why does having regular feedback and learning reviews matter to the business?
Well, since every business talks about improvement,
Hmm.
and I realize I'm dating myself. It's that gray hair again. It wasn't so long ago that we were all talking about continuous improvement.
Hmm.
How do you execute continuous improvement if you're not reviewing, learning, and adjusting? I'm old enough to remember W. Edwards Deming, and that's what he was all about, and it still works.
It does.
Right? Yeah, yeah,
Well, one of the things I really love about the Toyota way is that, a brand new employee first day on the production line can shut the whole thing down if they
yep.
see a way that they can improve things. And again, having that naive child mind going into management, I think is really powerful. We need to encourage people with fresh perspective because I think what happens is we get trapped in perception, and perception tends to be blinkered. And we need to go looking for bad news. We need to go for evidence that we may be wrong.
Yeah.
Run to the sound of gunfire, and that's what I think the performance review can do. And it's where the employee can give feedback to management. That is the really powerful stuff.
And that requires vulnerability and safety. And well, I guess it's tied to vulnerability, but the willingness to openly listen to critique without getting defensive.
Yeah. Who knew, eh?
Yeah, yeah, right. Yeah.
So we're coming to time. So let me ask you this. What's the one principle that you'd want every leader to remember before giving feedback? So how do you make those performance conversations something people look forward to, not fear?
By well, you can't do it the first time, right? Because everybody who's been to a performance review has their expectations of how it's going to go. I think the best way to do it is to really spend more of the time than most of us are accustomed to celebrating what the person has done well, what skills they bring that are so wonderful for the job, and less time, not the 5 minutes on celebration and the 55 minutes of beating at the woodshed, but maybe flip the script on that. And it may be that the first one or two of them, you're going to have to do that. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. And also, if you can't, I'm not suggesting going to 55 minutes and five, but also asking open-ended questions like the ones that you suggested. How can I help you? What do you want to be doing a year from now? What would success look like to you? Not to the organization, to you, and really make it focused on them and try to elicit genuine feedback from them.
I'd go a little bit deeper. And why is that important to you? What will
Yeah,
that allow you to do in life?
good ad, good ad. Yep.
Because
Or
again,
how does it play to how do you feel it plays to what you want to do or what you want to be?
well, people forget that people come to work partly for the money, but they want, generally, in my experience, they want to progress. And the people who really want performance reviews are top performers. The ones who don't want it are the weak performers. Now,
Yeah,
if we've hired weak performers, that's on us, not them, more often than not,
true.
because we shouldn't have hired them in the first place. Or if we have hired them because we see something in them, we need to create the conditions where they can grow and thrive and become the person and the employee and the operator that we want them to be, and that they want to be. And so, if every manager listening to this conversation today were to change one thing tomorrow, what would you suggest it should be?
Change the structure of how they do the review to cover what we just discussed. regardless of whether the HR system wants them to do it that way or not, and then go back and fill in whatever the hell you got to fill in to tick the box.
I'm with you on that. I think sometimes you just got to color outside of the box, and the human being that you're dealing with is not a square peg to be squeezed into that round hole.
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny you say that, because that was my first overly simplistic answer was, remember the person you're talking to is a human. But that still doesn't really say what you should change, which is why I didn't go with that. But yeah, spot on.
Excellent. Jordan, we've come to time. If you had your time again and you could whisper in the ear of the idiot 23-year-old Jordan before you got into management, what would you tell him for his first management role?
23 years old, before I was in management, I would have said, Jordan, if you want performance appraisals, performance reviews, do your own self-review and forget what the people you work for tell you.
Yep.
I would tell the future manager in me that I would never want to be the manager who took the review so seriously that he turned his pencil sideways and shaded in the 3-column.
My recommendation is talk to your colleagues and ask them if they've had people who they thought did good performance reviews, or if you've been fortunate enough to work for someone who has done good reviews, reach out to them and try to understand how they did it if you don't know. And if you do know, emulate what they did. That would be my best advice. I'm sure somewhere in the HR world, somebody has covered a fair amount of what we've talked about, but I'm not aware of it.
I think that's brilliant advice. If people want to get hold of you, how can they do so?
Oh, you can find me on LinkedIn. That's probably the best way. Jordan Corn, spelled just like the vegetable. And I'm always happy to connect, grow my network, and discuss.
So if you've got one parting message that you'd like people to take away from today, or one question that you'd like to leave them with, what would it be?
Think about how you can make the process of performance evaluation better for everyone involved, regardless of what your company tells you have to do, and then go ahead and do it.
I think that's pretty solid advice. So
thank you.
First of all, thank you.
Thank you. It's been a discussion.
So if we think about performance reviews, they shouldn't be a weapon. They need to be a growth opportunity. And they need to provide both sides with an opportunity for frank and honest feedback. And you need to leave with a plan of action that you then activate. There's no point going through the process to put all this stuff in theory. So instead of turning it into the annual Festival of Fiction, turn performance reviews into something meaningful and valuable for both sides. Feedback isn't a ceremony, it's a habit. Hire people better than yourself and help them stay that way. And if your people flinch when you speak, you're probably the problem. And the goal isn't evaluation, it's to embed and grow trust, learning, and dignity. And think about how you can make the process of performance evaluation better for everyone involved, regardless of what your company tells you to do. That was my big takeaway from Jordan, I think. Color outside the box, and don't let your performance review process get in the way of delivering something that's worthwhile and valuable and makes both sides trust and trusted.
Well said. Well said.
So, Jordan Corn, thank you very much.
Thank you. I had a fantastic time and would love to do it again someday.
Look forward to it. So this is Marcus Cauchi signing off once again from the Inquisitor podcast. If you found this useful and insightful, then please like, comment, share, get in touch with either Jordan or myself. And if you need help, please ask. In the meantime, happy selling and good managing. Bye-bye.